It started with a letter. Plain white, no frills, just a folded sheet slipped into her mailbox between the grocery coupons and the electric bill. The envelope had the faint scent of chlorine, like it had been stacked on a poolside table before being sealed. Vanessa Carter stood on her front porch, sun slipping lower behind the row of neat suburban houses, and frowned as she unfolded the page. "Dear Miss Carter," it began, "we regret to inform you that your access to the Sycamore Ridge Community Pool has been temporarily suspended, effective immediately. This decision was made following a violation of the HOA's Pool Conduct Policy, Section 5.1.3. Please contact the HOA office if you have questions regarding this decision." No specifics. No context. Just a polite, bureaucratic slap to the face. Vanessa read it twice. Then a third time. She flipped it over, half expecting a second page to flutter free, something explaining the actual offense. Nothing. Just the clean, blank back of the paper, as empty as the apology that should have been included. Vanessa stepped back inside, closed the door with a soft click, and set the letter on her kitchen counter. She glanced around her modest but meticulously kept home, the framed photos of her late husband, the spotless kitchen tiles, the neat stack of library books on the edge of the table. She had lived in Sycamore Ridge for 6 years, paid her dues on time, never missed a trash day, and had even served on the neighborhood watch committee for a summer before deciding she'd rather spend her evenings with a good book than listen to complaints about untrimmed hedges. She wasn't loud. She wasn't confrontational. She was the kind of neighbor people often overlooked, mistaking her quiet for compliance, her solitude for submission. But Vanessa had learned long ago that being underestimated was sometimes the best position to be in. People told on themselves when they thought you weren't paying attention. The next morning, she called the HOA office. It rang twice before a woman with a voice like brittle plastic answered. "Sycamore Ridge Homeowners Association. How can I help you?" Vanessa cleared her throat. "Yes, this is Vanessa Carter. I live on Willow Lane. I received a notice yesterday that my pool access has been suspended, but it didn't specify why. I'd like to know what policy I supposedly violated." There was a pause. Papers rustling. The click of a keyboard. "One moment, please." Vanessa waited, staring out the window at her neatly trimmed rose bushes, the ones she had planted herself when she first moved in. She thought about the hours she had spent on her knees, gloved hands in the dirt, coaxing each bloom from stubborn roots. Nothing beautiful ever grew without effort. Finally, the voice returned. "Ah, yes, Miss Carter. It looks like the suspension was issued due to a complaint filed about improper use of pool facilities." Vanessa frowned. "Improper use? I swam 3 laps and read a book. Is there a policy against reading now?" The woman's tone tightened. The complaint mentioned excessive use of shared amenities without accompanying guests, which, as you know, can make other residents uncomfortable. Vanessa blinked, her fingers curling slightly around the edge of the countertop. She had seen the pool crowded with families, teenagers roughhousing in the shallow end, toddlers shrieking as they splashed in the kiddie pool. She had never once caused a scene, never broken a rule. Her only crime, it seemed, was existing without an excuse. She took a slow breath. "Thank you for clarifying," she said, her voice calm and measured. "I'll be following up." She hung up, the dial tone humming like a distant warning. Vanessa wasn't one for confrontation, but she also wasn't one for being quietly erased. She logged into the HOA portal, navigated to the bylaws, and pulled up the full text of Section 5.1.3. It took a few minutes of scrolling, but there it was, tucked between bullet points about towel placement and glass containers. All residents must be accompanied by guests when using shared amenities for extended periods. A vague, subjective clause. The kind that could be interpreted a dozen ways, depending on who was doing the interpreting. She closed the laptop and sat back, eyes narrowing. This wasn't about rules. This was about control. About who felt entitled to space and who was expected to make themselves small. Vanessa had never seen anyone else fined or banned for sitting alone by the pool. Never seen a group of mothers reprimanded for monopolizing the shaded lounge chairs or a pair of retirees scolded for floating in the deep end for hours. No, this was different. This was personal, even if they didn't have the courage to say it out loud. Vanessa stood, walked to her hallway closet, and pulled out a small metal box from the top shelf. Inside were the papers she hadn't looked at in years, the original closing documents for her house, the HOA agreement she had signed without a second thought, the welcome letter from the real estate agent who had promised her a vibrant, inclusive community. She flipped through the pages, found the section on amenity rights, and smiled. They had assumed she wouldn't read the fine print. They had assumed she wouldn't know the difference between rules and rights. They were wrong. Vanessa closed the box, set it back on the shelf, and straightened her shoulders. She wasn't angry. Not yet. But she was awake. And that, as they would soon learn, was a much more dangerous thing. Vanessa didn't rush. She had learned, through years of quiet observation and careful listening, that the fastest way to lose a fight was to charge into it without a plan. So instead of calling the HOA back, instead of firing off an angry email demanding a face-to-face meeting, she took her time. She spent the next 2 days reviewing every document she could find on the Sycamore Ridge HOA website. She scrolled through meeting minutes, scanned financial disclosures, and even dug into old community newsletters. She wanted to understand the game before she chose her move. And what she found, tucked into the corners of poorly formatted PDFs and outdated bylaws, was the first crack in the polished facade of her neighborhood's pristine image. The HOA was in trouble. Financially, at least. Buried in the quarterly reports and treasurer's notes were subtle hints of strain, line items for pool maintenance that had doubled over the past year, unexplained transfers to a special projects fund, and a suspiciously high number of late dues from residents. The pool, it turned out, was a major drain on the budget. Heating, cleaning, insurance, lifeguard salaries. It all added up. And with fewer families using the pool post-pandemic, the HOA had been struggling to justify the expense. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled under her chin. The picture became clearer. The pool wasn't just a source of tension for a few nosy board members. It was a financial anchor pulling the whole association down. She closed the laptop and sat for a long moment, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in her quiet kitchen. She thought about her late husband, Charles, and how they used to sit at this very table, balancing their budget down to the cent while their young daughter practiced piano in the living room. Charles had always said that financial trouble wasn't just a crack in the foundation, it was an opportunity. People make their worst decisions when they're desperate, he used to say, tapping his pen on the table like a drumbeat. That's when they show you who they really are. The next morning, Vanessa took a different approach. She didn't go back to the HOA website. She didn't call the board. She called her lawyer. Not just any lawyer, Melanie Carter, her niece, a sharp-witted, second-year associate at a downtown firm who had been itching to prove herself ever since passing the bar. They met for lunch at a small cafe with good lighting and better privacy. "I need a favor," Vanessa said, sipping her iced tea slowly. "I want you to look into something for me." Quietly, Melanie leaned in, already intrigued. "Of course. What's up, Auntie?" Vanessa slid a piece of paper across the table, the words Sycamore Ridge Pool Facility written neatly at the top. "I need you to find out who really owns the pool. Not just the property, but the operational rights. Who holds the lease, who manages the insurance, who has the final say in maintenance contracts. I want every paper trail." Melanie's eyes sparkled. She had grown up watching her aunt win silent battles, getting a raise without asking, outmaneuvering store managers on return policies, talking down a predatory contractor with nothing but a spreadsheet and a stare. She knew this request wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. "Consider it done," she said, slipping the paper into her leather folder. "Give me a few days." Vanessa thanked her, paid the bill, and walked home slowly, letting the sun warm her face as she passed the neatly trimmed lawns and freshly painted fences of Sycamore Ridge. She smiled at a few neighbors, nodded at the kids racing their bikes down the street, even waved at the mailman. She didn't look like a woman planning a takeover. She looked like a woman enjoying her day. 2 days later, Melanie called. Her voice crackled with excitement. "Auntie, you're not going to believe this. The pool isn't actually owned by the HOA. It's leased. Has been for years. The original developers retained ownership and leased it to the HOA under a long-term, renewable contract. But here's the kicker, the lease is up for renewal in 2 months. And the developers have put the property up for sale to clear their books. The HOA hasn't bid on it yet. They probably can't afford to." Vanessa felt a slow, satisfied warmth spread through her chest. She didn't rush to respond. Just let her niece's words settle like a well-planted seed. "How much?" she asked finally. "Honestly, less than I expected. They're selling it as a distressed asset. The pool's a liability, high insurance, constant repairs, outdated plumbing. They're looking for a quick sale." Vanessa smiled, even though Melanie couldn't see it. "Send me the paperwork." The next week passed in a blur of phone calls, emails, and quiet strategy. Vanessa moved like a chess player, each decision deliberate, each step calculated. She formed a shell company, something clean, anonymous, without her name on any front-facing documents. She secured financing from a local credit union where the loan officer still remembered the way her husband used to bring donuts to every meeting. She hired a property inspector, negotiated a favorable closing price, and signed the papers in a small, windowless conference room that smelled like fresh ink and air conditioning. When it was done, she sat in her car for a long moment, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, staring out at the concrete parking lot without really seeing it. She had done it. The pool that had banned her, the place where she had been quietly erased, now belonged to her. But she wasn't done, because ownership was only half the victory. The other half was reclamation, and for that, she needed an audience. 2 days later, the HOA held its monthly meeting. Vanessa walked in just as it started, slipping into a seat near the back, unnoticed by most but recognized by a few who whispered behind their hands. She said nothing as the minutes were read, as the treasurer droned on about overdue fees, as the secretary passed out glossy flyers for the upcoming community barbecue. Finally, the president, a lean man with silver hair and a voice like a golf announcer, cleared his throat. Before we adjourn, we have one final item. The pool lease. As many of you know, we're coming up on the end of our current contract, and the board has been exploring options for renewal. Vanessa raised her hand. The president hesitated, eyes narrowing. He hadn't expected her to speak. She never had before. Yes, Ms. Carter, he said, voice straining for politeness. Vanessa stood slowly, every eye in the room turning to follow her movement. She reached into her purse, pulled out a thin folder, and held it up for all to see. I believe that discussion is no longer necessary, she said. Because as of 2 days ago, the pool is mine. The silence that followed was so complete, Vanessa could hear the slow tick of the wall clock behind her. And for the first time in weeks, she felt the water begin to rise, not to drown her, but to lift her. The room remained frozen for a long, heavy moment, the only sound the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Vanessa stood, calm and steady, the folder still raised like a flag of silent victory. The HOA president, Robert Langley, blinked twice, then adjusted his glasses as if they had suddenly stopped working. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. I'm sorry, what did you just say? Vanessa lowered the folder slowly, letting her gaze sweep the room. She saw the whispers die on trembling lips, saw the flickers of embarrassment on faces that had once looked through her instead of at her. She felt the air shift, thickening with the slow realization that something fundamental had just changed, and they were all standing in the center of it. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her voice was steady, clear. I said, as of 2 days ago, I own the pool. Purchased it through my LLC. Full ownership. The deed is in my name. She took a step forward, handed the folder to Robert, and watched as his fingers fumbled to open it. He flipped through the documents, eyes widening as each page confirmed what he had hoped was a mistake. The original lease. The transfer of ownership. The property tax receipts stamped and dated. It was all there, bound neatly, undeniable. Around the room, people leaned in, whispering to each other in tones that ranged from shock to disbelief. Vanessa let them. She wanted them to talk. She wanted them to feel the weight of their own assumptions settling on their shoulders, pressing down like wet concrete. Robert cleared his throat, struggling to regain some semblance of control. Ms. Carter, this is highly irregular. The pool is a community asset. It belongs to the neighborhood. Vanessa tilted her head slightly, the way a patient teacher might when correcting a student who should have known better. Actually, it's not. It never was. The developers owned it, leased it to the HOA, and recently put it up for sale as a distressed asset. You didn't bid on it. I did, and I won. The pool is now private property, and I am the sole owner. Someone near the back, a woman with a visor and tennis skirt, let out a small gasp. Another man muttered something under his breath, shaking his head like he'd just watched a magician pull a rabbit from his mailbox. Robert's face flushed a deep, mottled red. But this pool is part of our community identity. You can't just take it. Vanessa folded her hands in front of her, shoulders relaxed, voice calm. I didn't take anything. I purchased it. Legally. Fairly. And with the same rights you all have had for years, but never bothered to exercise. The room fell silent again, the weight of her words settling like a dropped anchor. For the first time, Vanessa felt the full measure of her own power, not just as a homeowner, but as a woman who had chosen to stop waiting for permission. She let the silence stretch a moment longer, then continued, her voice steady but firm. I'm not here to gloat. I'm not here to punish. But I am here to reclaim my space. You made a decision without consulting me. You enforced a rule without context. And now, I'm simply returning the favor. She took a deep breath, her eyes locking onto Robert's. The pool will remain open, but it will operate under new guidelines. Guidelines that prioritize respect, inclusion, and transparency. No more arbitrary bans. No more vague citations. No more gatekeeping disguised as policy. Someone near the front, a younger woman with a stroller parked beside her chair, clapped. Just once. Then again. Others joined in, slowly at first, then louder, the sound building like a summer storm. Vanessa didn't acknowledge it. She simply nodded once, then turned and walked out of the room, her footsteps steady, the door swinging shut behind her with a quiet finality. She didn't look back, but she didn't need to. She knew what she had left behind. The next morning, Vanessa sent a letter to every resident in the neighborhood. It was brief but clear, printed on thick, cream-colored paper with her LLC logo at the top. It read, Dear Sycamore Ridge residents, as the new owner of the Sycamore Ridge Pool, I am pleased to inform you that the facility will remain open to all residents, free of charge, for the foreseeable future. There will be no membership fees, no guest restrictions, and no excessive fines for minor infractions. My only request is that you treat each other and this shared space with the respect it deserves. Sincerely, Vanessa Carter, owner, Sycamore Ridge Pool. The letters went out before noon. By evening, her phone was buzzing with messages from neighbors, some congratulatory, others curious, a few even apologetic. She answered each one with the same quiet dignity, letting them speak, letting them stumble over their words, letting them realize that the woman they had dismissed had just become their silent benefactor. That weekend, Vanessa visited the pool for the first time as its owner. She wore a simple, dark one-piece, a wide-brimmed straw hat, and a pair of sunglasses. She walked through the gate without pausing, without the nervous hesitation she had felt just weeks earlier. She took a seat at the edge of the deep end, dangled her feet in the cool, blue water, and watched as families gathered around her, no longer whispering, no longer staring, no longer trying to erase her with their silence. A few children splashed nearby, laughing as they played a makeshift game of Marco Polo. An elderly couple floated quietly on pool noodles, their heads tipped back to catch the sun. And across the way, Robert Langley sat stiffly on a lounge chair, his sunglasses reflecting the bright, open sky, his posture tense but silent. Vanessa smiled, not for him, but for herself. She had reclaimed her space. Not just the pool, but the right to belong. And in that moment, with the sun warm on her shoulders and the water cool against her legs, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Not the kind you ask for. The kind you claim. The locks changed on a Wednesday. Not early, not late, but right in the middle of the afternoon, when the sun hung high and the air carried the faint, metallic whiff of freshly cut grass. Vanessa watched from her front porch as the locksmith, a young woman with tattooed forearms and a toolbox that clinked with every step, walked through the open gate of the Sycamore Ridge Pool, set her case down beside the main entrance, and went to work. It took less than 15 minutes. 2 locks, one on the main gate and one on the service entrance, both replaced with polished, keyless entry pads. The kind that didn't just require a code, but a swipe card for secondary access. Secure, modern, unmistakably different. The locksmith finished, dusted her hands on her jeans, and gave Vanessa a nod as she walked back to her truck. Vanessa returned the nod, raising her glass of iced tea in a silent toast. She had made sure to be visible, standing with her head high and her posture straight, not in defiance, but in presence. She wanted the neighborhood to see her, to recognize her, to remember that the locks weren't the only thing that had changed. An hour later, the first email started going out. Subject, New Pool Access System. Dear Sycamore Ridge residents, as part of ongoing improvements to the Sycamore Ridge Pool, we have installed a new security system. Effective immediately, all residents will need a personalized access code and swipe card to enter the facility. Please visit the pool office this week to register your household and pick up your cards. No fees required. Thank you for your continued support. Sincerely, Vanessa Carter, owner. The reactions were immediate. Some people were relieved, even grateful, appreciating the new security after years of petty thefts and forgotten fops. Others were confused, unsure why the pool they had always taken for granted was now under the control of a woman they had so casually dismissed. A few, predictably, were angry. The same voices that had whispered behind Vanessa's back at the last HOA meeting now grew louder, texting each other in hastily created group chats and muttering on sidewalks during evening dog walks. They grumbled about power trips and overreach, about how one woman shouldn't have this much control. They ignored, conveniently, that the HOA had wielded the same power for years without question. Vanessa let them talk. She wanted them to. She knew the grumbling was just the final stage of denial, the last bitter breath of those who couldn't accept that the world no longer moved solely at their convenience. The following Saturday, Vanessa held an open house at the pool. She had hired 2 lifeguards, a local caterer to set up a table of snacks and lemonade, and a jazz trio to play soft, unintrusive music near the shaded end of the pool deck. She didn't make a speech. She didn't wear a name tag. She simply greeted people as they arrived, handed out access cards, and answered questions with the calm assurance of someone who had nothing left to prove. The turnout surprised her. Neighbors she had never spoken to, people who had once crossed the street to avoid her, now lined up to shake her hand, to introduce themselves, to ask about the changes. She smiled, offered firm handshakes, and met each gaze without hesitation. She had no reason to shrink. She owned the space now, not just legally, but culturally. About halfway through the afternoon, she spotted Robert Langley standing near the edge of the crowd, arms folded, sunglasses reflecting the pool like 2 small screens playing a looped scene he couldn't control. He hadn't approached her yet, hadn't said a word since the meeting where she had revealed her purchase. He looked smaller now, his usual confidence reduced to a thin line of tightly pressed lips and shifting weight. Vanessa caught his eye, gave him a nod, and watched as he hesitated, then slowly made his way over. "Vanessa," he said, voice tight. "This is quite a change." She sipped her lemonade. "It is." He glanced around, noting the new signs, the fresh paint, the bright, inviting atmosphere that felt nothing like the old, gated-off pool he had once controlled with his petty fines and arbitrary rules. "You've really taken ownership." She smiled, not unkindly. "Yes, I have." He cleared his throat, still uncomfortable, still grappling with the idea that the quiet woman he had once dismissed as a nuisance had rewritten the entire landscape of his authority. "I suppose I should congratulate you. You clearly have a vision." Vanessa held his gaze, her eyes steady. "It's not just my vision, Robert. It's a return to what this place should have always been. Open, fair, respectful." He nodded, then forced a tight smile. The kind people wear when they know they've lost but can't quite admit it. "Well, I hope it all works out for you." "It already has," she replied, her voice calm, her posture relaxed. "And it will for everyone else, too, if they let it." He turned, walked away, and disappeared into the crowd, shoulders slightly hunched, his silhouette no longer the towering figure it had once been. Vanessa watched him go, then turned back to the pool, where children splashed in the shallow end, elderly couples floated on pool noodles, and parents leaned against the railings, chatting in the golden glow of late afternoon. It felt right, balanced, like something had finally clicked into place. As the sun dipped lower, Vanessa took a seat at one of the small cafe tables near the pool's edge. She looked out over the water, watched the ripples move across the surface, and felt the cool breeze against her skin. She thought about the letter that had started all of this, the quiet insult disguised as policy, the assumption that she would simply accept her place in the background. They had underestimated her. But more importantly, they had underestimated themselves, their capacity to grow, to change, to adjust to a world that no longer moved at the pace of their comfort. Vanessa leaned back, took a long sip of her lemonade, and closed her eyes. She had reclaimed her space, not just physically, but emotionally. She had redefined the boundaries of her life, rewritten the rules without raising her voice, and reshaped an entire community's understanding of who gets to belong. And in the distance, as the jazz trio struck up a final, slow tune, she heard the sound of children laughing, pure, unrestrained, and unguarded. Freedom, the kind you claim, the kind you keep. The days that followed the pool's grand reopening felt different, not just for Vanessa, but for the entire neighborhood. The air seemed lighter, the sidewalks busier, the sound of children playing no longer confined to backyards and cul-de-sacs. People lingered longer at the pool, their conversations less guarded, their smiles a little wider. The space had become what it should have always been, a place for connection, not just chlorine. Vanessa noticed it most during her morning walks. She had always been an early riser, her footsteps steady on the cool concrete as she moved through the shaded paths of Sycamore Ridge. She passed the same houses, the same manicured lawns, the same perfectly trimmed hedges. But now, those same neighbors who once averted their eyes or offered stiff, uncomfortable nods now waved first. They said her name, not just as a courtesy, but as recognition. "Morning, Vanessa. Beautiful day, isn't it, Miss Carter? Thank you for the pool party. My kids loved it." Vanessa responded to each with a smile, a nod, a soft word of thanks. She didn't linger, didn't make a spectacle of her walks, but she felt the difference. She had become visible, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. One Saturday morning, as she approached the pool, she saw a small group gathered near the entrance. They were installing a new sign, a sleek metal plaque mounted beside the gate. One of the lifeguards she had hired spotted her and waved. "Hey, Miss Carter, you should come see this." Vanessa walked over, curious. As she approached, the group stepped aside, revealing the freshly mounted plaque. It read, "Carter Pool, a place for all. Dedicated to the spirit of community and inclusion. Thank you, Vanessa Carter, for reminding us of what we can be." She felt a tightness in her throat, the kind that comes not from surprise, but from deep, unexpected gratitude. She reached out, brushed her fingers over the cool metal, felt the raised letters under her fingertips, and closed her eyes for a brief, private moment. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't sought it. But it meant something, not because of the name, but because of the acknowledgement. The recognition that she had not just bought back her space, but transformed it into something bigger than herself. "Do you like it?" one of the volunteers asked, his voice a little nervous, like he feared he had overstepped. Vanessa opened her eyes, let her fingers fall to her side, and turned to face him. "I love it," she said, her voice steady but warm. "Thank you." The man exhaled, visibly relieved, and the others clapped quietly, their smiles genuine, their postures relaxed. Vanessa felt a small, quiet warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to fully embrace until now. She had done it. She had reclaimed not just a pool, but a piece of her identity, her dignity, her rightful place in a community that had once tried to push her to the edges. That afternoon, the pool filled up faster than usual. Families poured in, beach towels slung over shoulders, coolers packed with sandwiches, toddlers clutching inflatable floaties. Someone had brought a Bluetooth speaker, and soft jazz played over the sound of splashing water and carefree laughter. Vanessa found a spot near the edge, her feet dipped into cool water, her sunglasses reflecting the shimmering blue surface. She watched as a young mother guided her 2 children into the shallow end, their shrieks of delight cutting through the humid air. She saw a group of teenagers dive into the deep end, their synchronized splashes sending ripples across the entire pool. She spotted the elderly couple she had seen at the first open house, floating side by side, their hands occasionally reaching for each other as they drifted. Then she saw Robert. He stood near the snack bar, hands in his pockets, his eyes moving slowly across the crowd. He looked smaller now, his shoulders slightly hunched, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. He caught her eye, hesitated for a moment, then gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. Vanessa returned it, her expression calm, her posture unthreatened. They weren't friends. They likely never would be. But they had reached something better than truce and understanding. As the sun dipped lower, casting long, golden shadows across the pool deck, Vanessa felt a presence beside her. She looked up to see Liza, the new HOA president, holding a glass of lemonade. She offered it to Vanessa with a small, knowing smile. "Thought you might need a refill," she said. Vanessa accepted it, took a long, refreshing sip, and set the glass down beside her. "Thank you." Liza sat down beside her, their legs both dipped in the water, the coolness a welcome contrast to the lingering summer heat. They didn't talk much, just sat side by side, watching the scene unfold before them, the air filled with the sounds of a neighborhood finally breathing freely. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the rooftops, casting the pool in a soft, dusky glow, Vanessa felt a deep, unshakable peace. Not the kind that comes from victory, but the kind that comes from knowing you've done the right thing, not just for yourself, but for those around you. She had taken a small, petty act of exclusion and turned it into a community rebirth, not through anger or revenge, but through quiet, deliberate action. And as she sat there, feet in the water, glass in hand, she realized something simple but profound. She had not just bought a pool. She had reclaimed a piece of herself, and she had given it back to others without asking for anything in return. The water shimmered before her, reflecting the sky, the sun, the faces of those she had brought together, and for the first time in a long, long while, Vanessa Carter felt truly, undeniably free.